A single torch sputtered in its sconce, sending jittering shadows dancing along the blackened stone walls of the Red Keep's lower corridors. The air was stifling, suffused with the faint reek of stale water and distant rot. Lyanna Stark had grown accustomed to the chill of Winterfell's crypts, but here, in the bowels of King's Landing, she felt a different kind of cold, one that had nothing to do with temperature. It lay beneath her skin, a ripple of foreboding that made every footstep echo louder than it should. She imagined the beating of her heart reverberating along the corridor, summoning watchers from the darkness. Yet she continued forward, pressing a shaking hand against the old stone, forcing herself not to lose her nerve. She could hear no one else, not yet. But she knew the Mad King's men patrolled these halls at all hours, searching for any would-be rebels or assassins. This was Arya's final stronghold. The city above was chaos, but the Red Keep stood defiant, its inhabitants poised to carry out the king's last vile commands. Rhaegar was gone, slain on the Trident by Robert Baratheon, and the realm was unraveling. Lyanna's betrothal to Robert had been overshadowed by her abduction and the ensuing war. Yet she was no helpless maiden waiting for rescue. She moved now with a singular purpose: to finish this before more innocent blood was shed. She had come too far to be deterred by her own fear. Drawing up to a corner, she paused, pressing her back to the wall. The torch's light ended just before that bend in the corridor, and total darkness waited beyond. She tried to listen for footsteps, any telltale sound that might signal a guard. But there was only silence. She exhaled slowly, steeling herself. She shifted her grip on the dagger she held, a weapon plainly forged, unadorned except for the faint lines of dried blood from the one guard she had already dispatched tonight. She refused to let herself linger on the memory of that guard's wide, frightened eyes. She had never taken a life before, but she would do so again if it meant ensuring Aerys Targaryen never harmed another soul. The plan was madness. Her brother Ned would have stopped her if he'd known of her intent. Robert, too, for all his bravado, would have been aghast at the notion of Lyanna sneaking through the keep alone, determined to plunge cold steel into the Mad King's heart. Yet she'd never told them, partly because they would have tried to stop her. Even more so because Lyanna knew that after the life she'd lived these past months, her freedom stripped, her fate uncertain, she needed to face the man who had condoned it all. She had to see his face in the final moments, to know in her bones that his tyranny ended by her hand. This was her choice, a reclaiming of everything he'd stolen. Turning the corner, she almost stumbled over the hem of her borrowed cloak. The garment had once belonged to a stable boy, threadbare and stained with grime, but it concealed her well enough. Any finery would have been a beacon in these dark halls. Behind her, the wet scuff of a rat made her tense. She spun, her dagger raised. The corridor was empty. She pressed her lips together, forging on. At last, she reached a narrow stair, spiraling upward. She knew from her careful gleaning of half-remembered Red Keep gossip that this stair led to a rear passage near the throne room. If the gods were just, she would emerge somewhere overlooked by the usual sentries. The steps were slick with condensation. She climbed cautiously, holding her breath at every squeak of leather or scrape of cloth. When she finally reached the top, she saw a small wooden door, slightly ajar. Candlelight and voices spilled through the gap. Her pulse thundered as she edged closer. Through the slit, she glimpsed two figures in scarlet cloaks, the gold sigils on their breastplates reflecting the candle's glow. She held her breath, trying to catch snippets of their conversation. One voice was tired, with the slight slur of a man who had drunk too much wine. The other seemed younger and more alert, but she couldn't parse the words. She wondered how to get past them without raising an alarm. Perhaps if she threw something to cause a noise in the hall behind them, they would leave their post. But in the gloom around her, the only available missiles were scraps of broken stone. She carefully groped for one, picking the largest shard that fit in her hand. The older guard yawned loudly. She could almost see the swirl of stale breath in the air. Then came a dismissive grunt from his companion, followed by a dull silence as they resumed watch, too languid to chat. Lyanna's heart hammered as she steadied herself. She flung the stone down the adjoining corridor, hearing it clatter loudly on the flagstones. The younger guard exclaimed, "What in the seven hells?" before heading off to investigate. She watched his shadow leave the threshold. For a tense moment, she waited. The older guard sighed, muttered a curse under his breath, and trailed after. When Lyanna heard their footfalls fading, she pushed the door open and slipped through. Ahead was a narrow hall lined with guttering torches. She moved swiftly, fighting the panic that threatened to seize her at the thought of how close she'd come to discovery. She could only hope the guards would dismiss it as a stray cat, or a trick of their own imaginations. Step by step she advanced, feeling the hush of the Red Keep close around her. Occasionally, flickers of distant screams or battle cries drifted in from the open windows overlooking the city. The siege was all but won for Robert's rebels, but the final blow had yet to fall. Until Aerys Targaryen drew his last breath, any savage retribution was possible. He was known to revel in cruelty. He had burned men alive for less than the betrayal unfolding now. She had to reach him first. If she failed, the entire city might burn. If the whispered rumors of wildfire caches were true, her path led her around another corner, past several shuttered doors. Each door felt like a threat. Any might spring open and disgorge loyalist soldiers or King's Guard. She remembered the legends of the King's Guard, how each was an unparalleled knight devoted to the Targaryen dynasty. If any were still within the keep, she would be hard-pressed to defend herself. But the war had pulled many from the capital, leaving King's Landing undermanned. Ahead lay a larger corridor, adorned with crimson tapestries. The Targaryen dragon snarled upon them, glaring at her with 3 heads. She pulled back into the shadows, pressing against a column, and surveyed the hallway for any sign of watchers. It was quiet. With a slow exhalation, she crept forward, her senses keen. The corridor opened into a grand foyer with high windows. Beyond that space, she knew, lay the massive throne room. She could feel the old stories weigh upon her. How Maegor had raised the Red Keep on the bones of his enemies, how the Iron Throne itself was forged from the swords of the conquered. She felt an odd chill. Had the ghosts of House Targaryen been watching her from the moment she stepped foot on these stones? At the edge of the foyer, she stopped and listened. The hall was quiet, lit by tall torches in iron sconces that flickered ominously. The ceiling soared high overhead, and each footstep threatened to echo. In the hush, she could detect a faint scraping sound, a slow dragging of something metal across the floor. She swallowed, peering into the gloom until she saw the outline of a single man, hunched near one of the pillars. He wore a worn cloak and was crouched beside what looked like a cluster of shattered swords. His hair was lank, and from the trembling of his hands, she guessed he was either injured or drunk, possibly both. She pressed herself behind a tapestry, straining to see if he was a threat. The man didn't seem to notice her approach. He held a broken blade in his hand and stared at it as though it were a serpent about to strike. The scraping noise came when he shifted it against the floor, drifting in and out of some private delirium. She glanced at his cloak, searching for any identifying crest, but saw none. Her mind raced. The best course might be to slip past him without confrontation. But the corridor was wide open, and his field of vision would certainly catch her. She hesitated, thinking to inch along the wall, trusting the dimness of the torchlight to cloak her. Just as she was about to move, the man suddenly mumbled, "They'll burn it all, burn us all to cinders." His voice was broken, his words slurred with despair. "Aerys will not spare us, he said so. Burn them all." I heard him. He wants to burn us all. An involuntary shudder ran through Lyanna. The man's words confirmed what so many feared. The Mad King had caches of wildfire hidden around the city. If cornered, he would unleash them without hesitation, rather than see himself dethroned. The knowledge struck Lyanna like a blow. She could see the swirl of green flame in her mind's eye, devouring everything in an inferno. It lent a sense of urgency to her mission that nearly stole her breath. She steadied her grip on her dagger. She forced herself forward, inch by inch, slipping from one column to the next. The man with the broken blade continued his lamenting monologue, caught in his own nightmares. The metallic scrape grated on her nerves, but he never looked up. By some small mercy, she crept past unnoticed, arriving at the far end of the foyer. There she found another tall door, partially ajar, leading into the throne room. She paused, collecting herself. The moment she stepped inside, there would be no going back. Aerys Targaryen would be beyond, perched upon that monstrous seat of jagged swords. Or perhaps pacing the dais, raving to his courtiers, if any still dared remain in his presence. Regardless, he would be guarded. The risk was enormous. But a faint resoluteness came to her from somewhere deep inside. She reminded herself she was a wolf of the north, daughter of House Stark. She inhaled slowly, pushed the door open wider, and entered. The throne room flickered with the light of braziers set along the sides. The vaulted ceiling soared above, supported by massive pillars. In the gloom, she could see the raised platform where the Iron Throne loomed. The seat's twisted metal spikes glinted with menacing brilliance, as though it awaited the next hapless occupant. She saw only a few figures moving along the edges of the room, shapes in the shadows. She heard the echo of each footstep as she advanced, pressing close to the row of pillars to stay hidden. Then she saw him, King Aerys Targaryen, a skeletal man with hair that had once been silver gold, but was now streaked with filth and ash. His robes were tattered, stained with old wine, and perhaps even blood. He sat sideways on the Iron Throne, one bony hand gripping a sword's edge to steady himself, careless of the blade's sharpness. His eyes were wild, sunken hollows in a face lined by mania. 2 Kingsguard flanked the dais, their white cloaks dark against the gloom. Aerys ranted at them, his words too disjointed for Lyanna to grasp fully. Occasionally he cackled, a rasping sound that curdled her blood. She counted only 2 knights near him. She cursed silently. Even that was more than she could handle in a frontal assault. She would need to wait, to find a moment when she could strike without alerting them both. Carefully, she knelt behind a pillar, waiting for a turn in the king's ravings that might draw one or both knights away. Time crawled by. Aerys's voice rose and fell, riding waves of hysteria. She heard him mention traitors and plots, how they all deserved the fire. Her shoulders tensed every time she imagined him discovering her presence. Then, abruptly, a distant crash resounded from somewhere outside the throne room, no doubt a sign of the ongoing infiltration by rebel forces. The Mad King bolted upright like a startled cat, hissing, "Go! Find whoever dares trespass in my halls," he commanded one of his Kingsguard, spittle flying from his lips. One knight immediately strode out, leaving only one by the dais. Lyanna's heartbeat pounded in her skull. This was her chance. If she could separate the last knight from the king, she might have a clear path. She waited until the man ventured a few steps aside, presumably to better see if anyone lurked among the pillars. Then she moved, silent as she could manage. Still crouched, she made for the side of the dais, out of the knight's direct line of sight. The floor was slick from disuse, and the braziers cast shifting pockets of gloom, where she could dart between columns. Aerys raved again, and Lyanna froze. The king had leaned forward, scanning the shadows. For one agonizing moment, she thought he saw her. His mouth hung open in a silent snarl, and a twisted grin lit his face. But then his gaze flicked away. She exhaled her pent-up breath. The single knight shifted position, obviously uneasy. In the echoes of the Red Keep, the thunder of battle grew louder, accompanied by the clang of steel. The rebel army was close at hand. Lyanna prayed they would not storm the throne room too soon. If that happened, chaos would explode, and Aerys might command the hidden wildfire lit at once. She had come too far to let that happen. From her vantage near the dais, she saw the rear of the Mad King's throne. The metal there jutted like black fangs. She tried to ascertain the best approach to climb it, or to circle it, in order to dispatch Aerys without crossing blades with the Kingsguard. As the knight paced down from the throne's steps, searching the perimeter, she realized she could slip up behind the throne's monstrous back and come around to Aerys from behind. If her luck held, she might plunge her dagger into him before he could even cry out. But she would have to time it perfectly, for the knight would only be a few strides away. She forced her shaking limbs to cooperate, carefully planting each foot to avoid scuffing the stone. The dais was raised a few steps. She carefully climbed those steps, crouching low, pressing herself flush with the cold metal of the Iron Throne's backside. The swirl of barbed steel threatened to snag her clothes, and she moved gingerly, biting her lip as the points grazed her arms. She forced herself not to cry out. On the other side of that hideous seat, Eris continued to rant, hurling invectives at traitors who existed only in his mind. The knight's footsteps sounded dangerously close. Lyanna waited for the knight to turn away. She could see the silhouette of his white cloak flickering in the corner of her vision. After what felt like an eternity, he pivoted to look down the length of the hall. Now was her only chance. She rose up from behind the throne, quietly shifting around the jagged edges. Eris' back was half turned. She could see the angle of his jaw, the pallor of his neck. She could almost feel the heat of him in the cold air. Her grip on the dagger was slippery with sweat. She had killed one man tonight, but this was the Mad King. A man whose name had haunted the realm for years, whose monstrous acts had destroyed lives and set the kingdoms aflame. And she was just a young woman from the north, untrained in the art of the assassin. But she would not falter. She crept closer. Her own breath sounded like a storm in her ears. Eris shifted, looking as though he might stand. She lunged before he could move. Her arms swept around, the dagger's point aiming for his heart. At that instant, the king twisted. Perhaps some instinct warned him, or the soft rush of her cloak alerted him to an attacker. The blade sank into his side instead of his chest. He let out a strangled shriek, eyes bulging in astonishment and agony. Spittle frothed at the corners of his mouth as he tried to twist away. Lyanna gripped the hilt with both hands, trying to bury it deeper. Blood spilled warm over her fingers, and the sudden reality of it nearly made her gag. The knight whirled. With a harsh cry, he rushed forward. Eris was screaming now, a high, unholy sound that ripped through the throne room. Desperate, Lyanna yanked the dagger free, sending a spatter of blood across the iron throne. She plunged it again, this time striking near the Mad King's throat. He convulsed, a choking gurgle replacing his shriek. But the knight was upon her. Sword bared, she ducked just in time to avoid his swing, feeling the passing blade graze her hair. She scrambled backward, the Mad King sagging off the throne, tumbling onto the dais floor with a ragged gasp. Blood pooled around him. The knight pressed his advantage, delivering a flurry of blows. Lyanna stumbled to the right, raising her dagger in a feeble parry. She managed to deflect one strike, but the force knocked her off balance. She dropped to her knees, the slickness of the stone threatening to slide her under his sword. As he raised his weapon for a killing blow, she made a desperate lunge forward, driving her shoulder into his midsection. Caught off guard, he staggered. She seized his cloak, dragging him sideways, fighting for her life. He was too strong, well-trained, and she could feel her arms trembling from the effort. He rammed a mailed fist into her ribs. Pain erupted, and her dagger rattled against the floor. She gasped, struggling to remain conscious. Another blow to her shoulder sent her sprawling. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ares choking on his own blood. She heard the king's gurgling breath, his wide eyes rolling as though searching for someone to save him. But that didn't slow the knight. He advanced grimly, blade poised for a final thrust. Lyanna's hand closed around a jagged sword shard on the dais, likely broken off from the throne's edges over decades. With every ounce of will, she lurched up, thrusting the shard at the knight's throat. The improvised blade sank past the gap in his visor. She felt the shock of it reverberate through her arms, heard the knight's startled grunt. Warm blood soaked her hand. She jerked back, nearly blinded by her own terror. The knight collapsed, his sword clattering from his grasp. He didn't speak again, only rasped once before going still. Lyanna stumbled to her feet, panting. Her chest flared with pain from the knight's blows. Her vision swam in the torchlight. She glanced to where the Mad King lay. His body twitched feebly, blood soaking his once regal robes. She felt a wave of nausea, but also a swelling tide of grim satisfaction. He was dying, and she was the cause. She had done what armies had longed to do for years. The cold emptiness of that realization stunned her. She staggered forward, picking up her dagger with trembling fingers. The king's eyes fixed on her, wide with a final flicker of hatred and confusion. Blood bubbled between his lips as he tried to speak, but no sound came. She knelt, aware of the searing pain in her side, and pressed the dagger's point to his neck. "No more," she whispered. He convulsed, eyes rolling back, and the last breath rattled out of him. It felt as if the entire throne room exhaled. She wanted to collapse. But the clangor outside grew, and she sensed the approach of others. Robert's forces, or the last defenders of the Targaryen cause, she couldn't tell. She turned toward the massive doors. Shouts reverberated in the corridor. She had only a moment to decide her next action. If she were found standing over the corpse of the Mad King by loyalists, they'd kill her on the spot. If it was Robert's men, she might be safe. But a swirl of conflicting thoughts seized her. She'd killed the king, who by law was the rightful ruler. The realm would see this as treason by House Stark. Yet the realm had also rebelled against that same king's tyranny. Would they hail her as a hero, or brand her a criminal? Yet a different, wild notion gripped her mind. The Iron Throne stood unoccupied. She stared at it, at the twisted, sword-forged seat that had loomed over the realm for centuries. She had as much claim as any. In this moment, she had ended the tyrant's reign. The Targaryen heir, Rhaegar, was dead, and his other children. Rumors said they had fled or been killed. The line was broken, and the realm was in chaos. If she were crowned, perhaps she could negotiate an end to the bloodshed. A new peace that would spare kings landing the horror of being torched by wildfire or sacked by vengeful armies. It was insane, but so was everything else that had transpired. She remembered the time she'd spent in the Godswood at Winterfell, praying for strength to do what was right. Perhaps the old gods were offering her a path forward. Another crash boomed in the corridor, and the throne room doors shuddered under the force of a battering ram. Sparks rained from the hinges. There was no time to hesitate. She staggered toward the throne, stepping over Aerys' corpse. She felt a wave of dizziness, but she braced herself against one of the throne's edges. 1,000 sharpened swords loomed around her, a testament to conquest and power. She could scarcely believe what she was doing, but she had come too far to turn away now. Blood stained her clothes and her face was smeared with sweat and grime as she climbed onto the Iron Throne. Pain radiated through her bruised side as she eased onto the metal seat. It felt cold, unyielding. She perched on the edge, forcing herself to straighten despite the agony. She felt the prick of a broken blade against her thigh. Her hair hung limp, her breath ragged. The door finally gave way. Men poured into the throne room, Robert's men by the looks of it, brandishing weapons and yelling. Their voices faltered when they saw her upon the throne. At their head was a tall figure, Robert Baratheon himself, caked in dust, helmet under his arm, a warhammer gripped in hand. His normally bold demeanor halted. She saw confusion, disbelief, and no small measure of fury cross his face as he beheld the scene. There was the Mad King's corpse at the foot of the dais, one Kingsguard knight also lifeless, and above them all, Lyanna Stark crowned in blood, seated on that fearsome throne. She summoned her courage, forcing her chin up. She gazed down at Robert, aware that every soldier around him wore an expression of shock, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Robert's chest heaved with the effort of battle. He took a step forward, brow furrowing in stark dismay. She could practically feel his questions even before he spoke. "How are you here? What have you done?" She found her voice, though it quivered with spent adrenaline. "The Mad King is dead. I slew him myself." Her words echoed in the hush. A murmur rippled through the gathered soldiers. Robert's stare flicked from her to the bloody dagger in her hand, to Aerys' crumpled body. She saw the swirl of emotions cross his features. Awe, confusion, anger. "Lyanna," he began, voice raw with shock. But she shook her head fiercely, her heart pounding anew. She did not know what boldness possessed her, but she forced herself to speak with all the authority she could muster. "The Targaryen line is ended," she said, her tone sharpened by lingering fear. She shifted on the throne, the metal pressing into her. "I have claimed the throne in the name of the realm. I will not see the city burned, or any more innocent lives ended. If you wish to kill me for it, then do so now. But I will not yield." Robert's eyes widened. His men exchanged uncertain glances. murmurs passing among them. The clang of distant swords still echoed from beyond the corridor. But in this moment, time felt suspended. Lyanna kept her chin raised, trying to maintain the semblance of composure. Yet she was trembling with exhaustion. If Robert demanded her life, she lacked the strength to fight back. She half expected him to fling aside his warhammer and seize her by the arm, dragging her from the throne that he felt was rightfully his. After all, the rebels had not fought this war so Lyanna Stark could sit as queen. She locked her gaze with his. The man she had once been meant to marry was torn between conflicting loyalties. To the cause, to their old betrothal, to his desire for vengeance on the Targaryens. She saw the pulse in his neck hammering. At length he spoke, his voice low and unsteady, loud enough for the men around him to hear. We all wanted the Mad King dead. But the throne? He wiped a hand across his brow. She detected the faintest tremor in his gesture. Gods be good, Lyanna. Are you certain? She could not be certain of anything, but she nodded, forcing a steadiness into her eyes she did not fully feel. I am, she said softly. Robert, I know the realm teeters on the brink of ruin. I know the taste of blood is in your mouth, and the men who followed you yearn for reward, for retribution. But I beg you, do not sack this city. The war is done now. The king is dead. Help me restore peace. Help me bring justice. Memini? Noel. A wave of tension swept the men, and Robert looked to them, uncertain. She recognized some of the faces, lords who had once visited Winterfell, men she had known only distantly. They saw her now as a figure of both awe and potential threat. She was a Stark in the south, a woman who had just performed regicide. She might well claim the entire conquest for herself. That notion might enrage them, or inspire them, or both. She felt her heart in her throat. Before Robert could reply, the pounding of more footsteps came from behind his assembly. Ned Stark appeared, pushing through the throng. His face was ashen, eyes wide with alarm. Blood streaked his armor. He halted when he saw Lyanna on the throne, and the bodies sprawled before her. His jaw tightened. Lyanna's heart twisted, seeing her gentle brother so hardened by war. Yet in his eyes, she saw relief to see her alive, mingled with horror. His voice reached her ears, hushed and disbelieving. Lyanna! He looked from her face to the Mad King's lifeless form. She tried to summon a reassuring smile, but her face felt numb. Pain flared in her side. She realized she was bleeding from a gash inflicted by the Kingsguard. But she forced herself upright, voice trembling only slightly. It is done, she said, gesturing toward the corpse. Aerys will burn no more men. The Targaryen line is broken. She paused, voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite name. I will not see another tyrant rise in his stead. I claim the throne for myself and for the realm. Ned, if you would kneel to me, I would name you my hand. Our family has always served the realm with honor. This city needs a strong hand to keep it from ruin. Oh. Ned stared at her as though seeing a stranger. She could hardly blame him. She was not the same girl who had once laughed in the Godswood, unburdened by war. The silence stretched. The men around them shuffled, uncertain how to react. Ned was torn. She could see it in his eyes. He had come to King's Landing to bring justice against the Targaryens, to seek Robert on the Iron Throne. But there was also the oath he had once sworn to protect his sister. If she wanted the throne, did his honor compel him to support her? She felt faint from blood loss. The torchlight swirled in her vision, but she refused to bow her head. She held Ned's gaze with that steely resolve that had guided her steps all night. At length, Ned lowered his eyes, the corners of his mouth twitching with an anguish that told her he was struggling between loyalty and duty. Carefully he knelt on one knee. She heard gasps from the men close by. Robert stared at Ned, then at Lyanna, his thick brows knitting together. For a moment, it seemed as if Robert might rage. But Ned's kneeling stirred the men's sense of tradition. A hush rippled through the hall. She saw a few more soldiers bend their knees out of respect for Ned's gesture. Others stood uncertain, casting quick glances at Robert. Lyanna let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. In that small space of submission, She sensed the shift in the room's balance. Even the battered doors behind them grew quiet, the battle apparently winding down as their men took the last corners of the Red Keep. She tasted copper in her mouth, blood from a split lip she didn't remember receiving. The moment felt precarious. If Robert rejected her claim, it would come to bloodshed between them. She could scarcely imagine anything more tragic. And yet, she had to stand firm. She watched him take a halting step forward. The clang of his boots on the stone rang out. He stood at the base of the dais, gazing up at her. She saw a flicker in his eyes that might have been heartbreak. Perhaps he'd imagined a different future for both of them, one where they ruled as king and queen. But she had seized the crown for herself alone. After a tense beat, Robert exhaled, his warhammer lowering to the floor. His voice came out rough as he addressed the hall. The Mad King is dead. Westeros is free of his tyranny at last. He lifted his gaze again to Lyanna. By rights, it should be me, or... His words trailed off. She couldn't hold his gaze. The pain in his eyes cut deeper than any sword. But she clutched the arms of the Iron Throne, ignoring the spikes that bit into her skin. Robert, I offer you friendship if you'll have it, she said quietly. This war was waged to end the Targaryens' cruelty. That end is here. She shut her eyes for a moment, gathering her last scraps of resolve. I will not claim the throne to be like Aerys. I will do everything in my power to restore peace. He stood unmoving, the brazier's flames dancing along his sweat-streaked brow. Then, with agonizing slowness, he bowed his head. She heard the clang as he sank to one knee, the butt of his warhammer hitting the floor. The men behind him shifted with audible surprise. But whether out of respect for the victory over the Targaryens, or devotion to Robert and Ned, or fear of further bloodshed, they followed suit. The hall filled with the rustle of knees and armor. Lyanna let out a shaking breath, relief mingling with dread. She was queen now, or something close to it, and the realm was in tatters. The real challenge had only just begun. She gripped the throne's arms, ignoring the bite of iron at her thighs, and gazed at the kneeling lords and soldiers of the rebellion. She wanted to weep, to collapse onto the floor and sleep for a week. But there was no time for that. Slowly, painfully, she stood. Her voice trembled, but she infused it with all the strength she had left. Rise. Help me save this city from itself. Help me ensure the wildfire is never lit. Help me build a realm of peace and justice, so that what I have done here tonight is not in vain. Then now. The men rose as one, their expressions tinged with awe, confusion, and some measure of hope. Robert caught her eye, and though his face was hard, he gave a curt nod. He turned to the men, commanding in a sharp voice that they secure the Red Keep, hunt down any last pockets of the king's men, and seize all wildfire stockpiles. Ned came to the dais, gazing at his sister's bloodied form. She saw tears in his eyes, though he did not shed them. He took her hand gently, wincing at her injuries. She leaned on him, swaying. You're bleeding, he whispered. She managed a faint smile through her exhaustion. We both know I've had worse scrapes as a child, she teased. It was a meager attempt at humor, but Ned's lips twitched in a pained semblance of a smile. Robert, too, ascended the steps, though he kept a careful distance. She saw the conflict in his eyes. He reached out as though to help steady her, but then withdrew his hand. She thought of how he had once spoken of giving her a crown, of how their marriage would unite the North and the Stormlands in strength. That dream was lost, replaced by this new reality. She forced herself to address him. Robert, she said, your bravery has carried us here, and the realm will need it still. She hesitated, feeling the weight of the dagger in her hand. She lowered it. Will you stand with me? Not as king, but as warden of the South. The Stormlands remain yours to rule, and I would have you fight beside me as an ally. Will you do that? Ben toi. For a moment, he looked as though she had asked him to cut out his own heart. The tension in his face gave away the bitter disappointment and the swirling tangle of emotions. But his men were watching. The entire realm's future was balanced on a razor's edge. At last, he inclined his head. For the good of the realm, he said, voice tight, I will stand with you, my queen. The words caught in his throat, but they had been spoken. Lyanna closed her eyes, relief mingled with sorrow for what might have been. They helped her settle more comfortably on the throne's edge as the swirl of soldiers and onlookers began to fill the chamber. Word spread quickly that the Mad King was dead, and that Lyanna Stark, rumored captive, rumored beloved of Rhaegar, sat upon the Iron Throne. Whispers raced through the halls faster than wildfire. The tension in the city was far from resolved, and the battles outside might rage on a while longer. But here in the Red Keep's great hall, a new power had been claimed. The hours that followed blurred. Messengers were sent, orders were given. Ned coordinated with loyal Stark men, while Robert barked commands to his own force, ensuring no further atrocities took place. The Targaryen banners were torn down or set aside. The crowned dragon still hovered in corners as if refusing to vanish. Lyanna, fighting the haze of her injuries, forced herself to remain on the throne, greeting lords who came in shock and desperation, each uncertain how to address her. She felt the eyes of everyone upon her, some seething, some awed. She wanted to rest, but she knew that the moment she left the throne, she might never regain the advantage. At some point, Grand Maester Pycelle appeared, trembling and sweating profusely. He tried to approach her with subservient murmurs about how the realm must be guided by wisdom, how the Targaryen line had always been the rightful rulers. But one look from Ned's grim face silenced him. Soon, he was banished from the throne room to rummage for potions and bandages. Ser Barristan Selmy, a Kingsguard loyal to Rhaegar, appeared as well. He arrived wounded and uncertain. The sight of Aerys's body, cut down at last, made him blanch. He bowed stiffly to Lyanna, though she could see the conflict in his eyes. The conflict of a knight who had served House Targaryen his entire adult life. Robert's men returned to report that they had located multiple caches of wildfire beneath the city. Lyanna felt a chill in her blood at the confirmation. Had Aerys lived a moment longer, he might have commanded King's Landing to burn. Hundreds of thousands would have died in a swirl of green flame. But now, with the Mad King lying in a pool of his own blood at her feet, that fate had been averted. The knowledge made her feel lightheaded, and she pressed a hand to her side, trying to quell the throbbing. Ned urged her to let the maester tend to her wounds, but she refused to abandon the throne until the city was fully secured. She was the realm's new ruler, no matter how tenuous that rule might be. It was too fragile a claim to risk overshadowing by doubt. Still, with every passing moment, exhaustion clawed at her. The taste of blood in her mouth lingered, and her lungs felt raw from the night's efforts. She found her thoughts drifting, remembering the days of her youth at Winterfell. She had been so free then, riding her horse across the frosted moors, never imagining that one day she would sit on the Iron Throne, drenched in the Mad King's blood. And though her choice had been driven by desperation, she knew in her heart that this was the only way to break the cycle of cruelty. She had made a vow to protect the realm, to bring peace. She prayed to the old gods that she might succeed where so many had failed. Before the night ended, lords who had once pledged themselves to Targaryen rule began arriving, either in chains or under guard, or else bearing pleas for mercy. They found Lyanna Stark in a battered cloak, the rips and bloodstains clearly visible, her dark hair matted against her forehead, a haunted intensity in her gray eyes. Some demanded she relinquish the throne to Robert. Others demanded she surrender to Targaryen loyalists. But she listened in silence, perched on those twisted swords, until Ned and Robert's men subdued them, or made them see sense. Eventually, the tide of pleas subsided as the reality of Aerys's death spread. One by one, the pockets of resistance fell. Some tried to flee the city. Others chose to bend the knee. At dawn's first light, the throne room was filled with the weary survivors of the night's battles, soldier and lord alike. Fires still smoldered in parts of King's Landing, but the worst had been avoided. Lyanna gazed through the high windows, seeing the pale glow of sunrise over the blackened rooftops. Soldiers lined the hall, battered and bloodied. She let out a trembling breath, though her voice, when she spoke, was steady enough to echo. The Mad King's reign is ended. May peace guide us now. She did not know how many had died to make that sentence truth. She only knew that she must make the cost worth it. Sitting on that freezing seat of swords, she felt a solitary tear slide down her cheek, hot and stinging, carrying all the grief and hope she possessed. Yet she did not look away. The realm, in all its pain, gazed upon her. She met its eyes unflinchingly. If the gods were just, they would grant her the resolve to do better than her predecessor. And if they were not, then she would forge that justice herself. For the first time since slipping into the Red Keep's depths, she allowed herself to breathe. She had killed a king. She had claimed a crown. And the future of Westeros now rested on her weary shoulders. The dawn had arrived. So be it. Let them see a Stark upon the Iron Throne. Let them question, or curse, or praise. She would face them all. And somewhere in the hush of that grand haunted hall, she thought she could almost hear her father's voice echoing from the distant north, reminding her of the Stark words. Winter is coming. She closed her eyes. Winter might be coming, but so too was a new age. And she, Lyanna Stark, would be its queen. Dawn light filtered through the high, narrow windows of the throne room, casting pale streaks across the bloody tiles. Lyanna felt the faint brush of cool morning air on her face, a relief after the suffocating heat of battle and the long night's dread. Her entire body ached, every muscle raw, every bruise protesting as she tried to shift her weight on the Iron Throne. It was a seat of conquest, never meant to be comfortable. Spikes and shards of steel threatened to dig into her legs. She'd been perched there for hours, clinging to a semblance of authority she'd scarcely had time to comprehend. A Stark on the throne, words that would have sounded like a drunken jest just a fortnight ago. Ned stood at her side, his face drawn with fatigue and worry. Robert lingered a short distance away, gripping his warhammer so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Around them, knots of soldiers murmured in hushed voices, uncertain what to do now that the Mad King was dead. Sir Barristan Selmy had not left the hall, though he kept to the edges, as if struggling with a private torment. The body of Aerys Targaryen remained near the foot of the dais, though blankets now covered him. Lyanna could not bring herself to order the corpse removed until she'd addressed the necessary formalities. Some distant part of her mind thought it grimly fitting that the man who had terrorized them all should lie in the open for the realm to see. But her stomach churned with lingering nausea at the memory of how his blood had felt, hot on her hands. She forced herself to speak, though her voice came out ragged and hoarse. We must send word to all corners of the city. Let them know the fighting is done here in the keep, that the king is dead. She paused, swallowing to dampen her dry throat. Assure them they have a queen now, not another tyrant. Her declaration fell into silence. A few men nodded, though wariness haunted their expressions. She saw Robert's jaw clench, but he said nothing. Instead, one of his captains saluted stiffly and hurried off to dispatch messengers. Lyanna watched him go, blinking against the brightening morning. She felt as if she stood on a frail bridge over an abyss. Any misstep could send her plunging into ruin. She never asked for this. Yet how many times had she yearned to change the course of events, to save the realm from this ruinous war? Ned cleared his throat. We should see to your wounds, he said. If you fall ill now, the city might think. She gave him a small shake of her head. Not yet. First, I must ensure the wildfire caches are secured. We cannot rest while a single spark could still... Her voice trailed off. The memory of Aerys's hateful screech burned them all, lingered in the corners of her mind. How close they had come to utter catastrophe. She swallowed. Where is Lord Tywin? Ned's lips pressed together in a grim line. Last we heard, Lord Tywin was just outside the gates with his army. He claimed to have come to support the victorious side. But we know well his motives may be complicated. A flicker of distaste passed over Ned's face. Robert shifted from foot to foot. Tywin always chooses the winning side, he muttered. That's the only loyalty he knows. If he hears the Targaryens are finished, he'll turn coat as quickly as he needs to. The question is whether he'll accept you on the throne, Lyanna, or whether he intends to press some other claim. No? She didn't want to think about Tywin Lannister's ambitions. or how easily he might champion a new figurehead if it gained him more power. "Send word that he may enter the city peacefully," she said. The final word felt bitter on her tongue. "But let him know I will not tolerate pillage. If I hear so much as a single child harmed by his men, I'll have his head." A few of the Baratheon men exchanged startled glances. The notion of a Stark woman threatening Tywin Lannister would have seemed laughable a day ago. But the hush in the throne room affirmed that her position, no matter how precarious, was no jest. She might be young, newly emerged from captivity and bloodshed, but she sat upon the Iron Throne, and she had killed the Mad King herself. Robert gave a curt nod, evidently impressed by the steel in her voice. Though his mouth remained set in a tight line, he turned to one of his bannermen. "See it done. Escort Tywin inside. We'll see how quickly he bends." The knight obeyed, leaving with a troop of men at his back. Soon after, others arrived bearing news that pockets of Targaryen loyalists had tried to hold the southern gates, but surrendered when they realized Aerys was slain. Lyanna heard the reports numbly, her mind struggling to piece everything together into some shape of order. The entire realm was about to learn of this cataclysmic shift in power. Would they accept her? Or would more break out? Dizziness pressed upon her. She touched Ned's arm. "I suppose I should at least let the maester wrap my side," she conceded in a low murmur. Her body felt heavier than stone, and the blood dried on her clothes tugged at her skin every time she moved. Ned guided her down from the throne. The relief she felt upon standing was almost undone by a stab of pain near her ribs. She grimaced, hiding it as best she could, acutely aware that all eyes were on her. Even then, as soon as her feet touched the floor, she realized how unsteady she was. The dais and its steps swayed before her vision. Robert moved as if to help, but he hesitated, uncertain how to bridge that gap between them now. "I'm fine," she insisted, though she clutched Ned's arm. She wanted to walk with dignity past the king's body, covered though it was by a stained cloth. But when her gaze swept over the lifeless shape, she felt a wave of nausea, less from pity than from the memory of her own hand driving steel into him. But she pressed on, forcing herself to stand taller. A small retinue followed. Ser Barristan watched her approach with solemn eyes. When she drew near, he stepped aside, bowing stiffly. "Your Grace," he said, his voice strained. He was younger than she'd realized from afar, though gray threaded his hair. She had heard of his prowess, the way he had once been called Barristan the Bull. Now his boldness had led him here, to a vanquished court and a slain king. She halted, taking in the sorrow etched on his face. "Ser Barristan," she said softly, "I know your vows bound you to House Targaryen. I will not force you to break your honor." His gaze flickered. "My vows bid me defend the king and his family," he said, voice raspy with fatigue. "Yet the king is dead. The prince is dead. The children, if they still live, they are fled. My vows remain, yet there is no one left to fulfill them for." He exhaled slowly, as though each breath pained him. "I will not serve a tyrant. I swore to protect the realm too, no matter the cost. If you can promise not to become as Aerys was, then perhaps." His words trailed off. She could see the torment in his eyes. His entire adult life had been shaped by Targaryen rule. She nodded, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "I can promise I will not burn innocents alive or fill the city's tunnels with wildfire." She managed to keep her voice calm, though her wounds throbbed. "If you wish to depart, you are free to do so, Ser Barristan. I will not hold you here against your will. But if you remain, know that I'll have need of honorable knights, desperately so." A moment passed before he inclined his head. "Then I remain, Your Grace." The last two words came with a trace of bitterness, or perhaps grief. But he said them, and he did not rise from his partial bow until she left his side. Lyanna felt Ned's hand tremble ever so slightly on her forearm. It was a grim sign of how everything had changed in the space of a single night. She descended the main aisle of the throne room, flanked by men who wore the colors of Stark Baratheon, and even some Tully banners. Many were battered, smudged with soot, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. They parted to let her pass, their gazes flicking nervously from her to Robert, unsure where final power resided. She heard their murmurs in the hush that followed her steps. "The Wolf Queen," someone whispered. The phrase sent a ripple along her spine. Was that who she was now? She tried to ignore it, focusing on each shaky step. Ned guided her through a side corridor toward the small council chambers. The corridors were littered with rubble and broken furniture. The fight to seize the Red Keep had not been gentle. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to the air. At intervals, fallen bodies lay slumped against the walls, some in Targaryen colors, others in tattered rags. Her throat tightened at the sight of them all, the realms dead. How could there be peace after so much blood? They reached a smaller antechamber with a sturdy oak table. A few chairs lay toppled, scattered parchment across the floor. A single narrow window admitted the rising sunlight, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Grand Maester Pycelle hovered nervously, flanked by two younger attendants. When Lyanna stepped in, Pycelle bowed so deeply that his chain rattled. "Your Grace, oh, it grieves my old heart to see you wounded. Pray, let me attend to." She shot him a dark look, remembering how he had once served Eris so faithfully. But she could hardly turn down the help of a maester now. "See to it," she said curtly, easing herself onto one of the upright chairs. Immediately, the maester and his attendants bustled about, gently peeling back the torn cloth of her cloak to reveal a blood-soaked bandage Ned must have wrapped around her waist at some point. The simple act of removing it made her teeth grind with pain, but she held silent, refusing to cry out. Robert lingered in the doorway, leaning on his warhammer. His gaze was fixed on the window, as though he couldn't bear to watch her being treated. Ned stood at Lyanna's side, speaking quietly to her as Pycelle dabbed a pungent ointment along the gash. The sting of it was fierce, and she winced, bracing her hand on the table. "You'll need stitches," Pycelle murmured, frowning at the wound. "I regret that I must cause further pain, Your Grace." She nodded dully. Her mind drifted to all that still lay ahead. She would need a hand of the Queen, Lord sworn to her, a plan to rebuild the city's governance. And that was only the beginning. She gritted her teeth as Pycelle's needle pressed into her torn flesh. Each stitch sent a jolt of agony through her. But she refused to flinch too visibly, aware of Robert in the corner, aware of the young attendants watching with wide eyes. If she cried out, they would see a frightened girl. If she remained resolute, they might see a queen. Her throat felt dry when Pycelle finished. He bound her ribs in fresh linen, muttering about poultices and rest. She caught only fragments of his admonitions, something about it, festering, if not carefully tended. She clenched her jaw, refusing to show how dizzy she felt. At last Pycelle stood back, bowing again. "There, my queen. The worst is closed. You must rest, or you risk opening the wound again." Ned's voice was gentle. "He's right, Lyanna. You can't continue like this." She mustered a small, humorless smile. "A queen's duty rarely allows for rest, I suspect. There's too much to do." Still, when she tried to push to her feet, her legs trembled. Robert finally moved from the doorway, crossing the chamber in a few strides. He set his warhammer aside, and for a moment it seemed as if he might help her stand, wrap an arm around her waist. But he halted just shy of touching her, his expression conflicted. She looked up at him, seeing the lines of grief etched beneath the grime on his face. "Robert," she said in a low voice, "I know this is not what we imagined." He exhaled loudly, as if struggling with words. His broad shoulders tensed. "No," he said, "it isn't." A pause followed, thick with unspoken regrets. "I fought for a throne," he added, voice rough. "And now you occupy it. Killed the man I swore to kill. Hard to know what to feel." She nodded wearily. "Had I left him alive for you, he might have burned the city." She didn't mean to sound chiding, but the stress of the night frayed her temper. "If I had stood aside waiting for you, hundreds of thousands might have died." He lowered his gaze, wincing as if she'd struck him. "I know," he said more quietly now. "I'm not ungrateful, Lyanna, for what you've done. But," his eyes rose to meet hers, brimming with emotion, "where does it leave us?" She felt Ned's presence at her side, as though he stood ready to intervene if Robert's temper flared. But Robert only looked tired, stripped of his usual roar and bravado. "We have the same goal," she said carefully. "To end this war, to free the realm from tyranny. You, Ned, and I, we can forge a new beginning, or we can tear each other apart fighting for the spoils of victory." Her voice fell to a near whisper. "I won't let it come to that. I have had enough of bloodshed." Robert stared at the floor for a moment. Then, with a curt nod, he glanced aside. "Tend your wounds," he muttered. "I'll gather the lords and see to the city's gates. We should expect Tywin's arrival soon. We'll need to plan our next step." Without another word, he turned, hefting his warhammer, and strode out. She watched him go, her chest aching with more than physical pain. Pycelle cleared his throat. "If I might suggest, Your Grace, it may be wise to meet with the lords as soon as you're able. Assure them of continuity, perhaps. The city is in a precarious state." She almost laughed at the idea of anything akin to continuity after last night's events. But she knew the Maester was right. King's Landing's population would be terrified. Some might fear a wave of retribution by northern soldiers. Others would simply wonder if the Targaryen loyalists would counterattack. She nodded. "Yes. We'll hold a council soon. For now, see to the injured, Pycelle, and ensure the small folk know they are not to be harmed by any soldier." She locked eyes with him. "I will not have my reign begin with the sacking of King's Landing." His jowls quivered. "Of course, Your Grace," he managed, as though the concept unsettled him. He and his attendants bowed themselves out of the room, leaving Lyanna, Ned, and a small handful of northern guards. Dust and the smell of ointment lingered in the chamber. She closed her eyes briefly, leaning her head back against the stone wall. Ned placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've lost too much blood," he said softly. "Let me help you to a bed." She shook her head. "I have to see to the realm. I don't even know if we have enough supplies in the city. If the Lannisters bring their army inside the walls." He sighed. "Lyanna, you've always been strong-willed, but you can barely stand upright. At least rest for a short while. You can't lead a realm if you collapse." "Dem? Mixar." She opened her mouth to protest, but found herself swaying. Perhaps she had only stayed conscious this long through raw adrenaline. Now that the immediate danger had abated, her body felt leaden. She pressed her hand to the fresh bandages at her ribs, wincing. She wanted to keep fighting through the day, but Ned's presence reminded her that she needn't do everything alone. She drew in a shaky breath. "Very well," she conceded. "1 hour, no more. Then I will hold council." "Then now." He gestured for one of their guardsmen, an older man named Wendell Hill, if she recalled correctly, to help him. Carefully they guided her through the corridors. The Red Keep felt surreal in the early morning light. Battered doors, fallen tapestries, and bloodstains on the floors. She passed a swirl of men in the halls, some wearing stark direwolf badges, others bearing the Stag of Baratheon. They bowed or gave uncertain nods as she passed. She noticed Robert's voice resonating from somewhere deeper in the keep, giving orders in a tone that brooked no argument. Maybe he could keep the men in line while she recovered. At last, they arrived at a modest solar that had not been ransacked. She doubted it was the grandest chamber, but it had a bed that looked at least serviceable, and the shutters were intact. Ned ushered her to lie down, and she sank onto the thin mattress with gratitude, hissing at the pain that flared in her side. She tried to shift until the ache became more bearable. Ned crouched beside the bed. "I'll station guards at the door. No one enters without your leave. You can have a moment's peace." Nemn. Exhaustion made her eyelids heavy, and she realized she could barely lift her head. But she placed her hand over Ned's. "Thank you, brother," she murmured. "You knelt in the throne room. I know what that cost you." His expression tightened. It was not easy, Robert. He truly believed it was his destiny to wear the crown, and I believed it too for a time. He exhaled, a faint tremor in his voice. "But I lost you once, Lyanna. I'll not lose you again. If you truly mean to be queen, I'll support you." She felt a rush of gratitude. "I love you, Ned. I hope I can be worthy of your trust." Her voice faltered with emotion, the burden of everything weighing on her chest. It felt like an avalanche of consequences that had only just begun to fall. He squeezed her hand gently. "Rest now. I'll wake you soon." She drifted, the sounds of the keep fading. Her dreams were jagged. Images of the Mad King's face twisted in fear, of Robert striding away from her, of the Iron Throne's blades pressing into her flesh. She saw the north, blanketed in snow, with a pack of wolves howling at a red moon. In that swirl of visions, she couldn't tell if she was awake or asleep, only that her heart pounded and every breath flared with pain. When she finally opened her eyes again, the solar was lit by a gentle midday glow. Ned stood near the window, arms folded. He must have heard her stir, because he turned, relief softening his features. "You slept longer than an hour," he said quietly, "but you needed it. It's past midday." She pushed herself upright, ignoring the tug of stitches. "Past midday?" Her voice rose in alarm. "Ned." He came to help her swing her legs over the side of the bed. "The city still stands," he reassured her. "Robert has kept the men disciplined, for now. Tywin Lannister has entered the gates. He's in the throne room, waiting to speak with you." Her stomach twisted at the mention of Tywin. The man's reputation preceded him. Cunning, ruthless, relentlessly cold. She braced her hands on the bed, centering herself. "Has there been any trouble?" "Not so far. Lord Tywin brought a large host, but he hasn't loosed them upon the people, thanks to Robert's warning. We have a sense of fragile calm. But the lords will want an audience with you, all of them." "And she nodded, grimacing. "Then let's not keep them waiting." With effort, she rose to her feet, her legs still shaky, but steadier than before. She looked down at the clothes she wore, torn, blood-stained, hardly regal. "I can't greet Tywin Lannister looking like a common sellsword," she muttered, feeling an odd flicker of vanity, or perhaps it was just awareness of the illusions she had to maintain. "Is there a gown somewhere in this keep that isn't burned or ripped?" Ned gestured to a small trunk set by the door. "We managed to find something that might fit. One of the ladies loyal to the Red Keep brought it." Lyanna hesitated. She had never been one for courtly finery, but as queen, appearance mattered. She forced herself to unwrap the trunk and pull out a gown of deep blue velvet trimmed with silver lace. It was finer than anything she had owned at Winterfell. She felt a moment's pang at the thought of wearing a dead woman's clothing. Likely Targaryen property once, or belonging to someone in the castle staff. But necessity won out. She slipped out of her tattered cloak and let Ned's presence be her shield against vulnerability as she carefully drew the gown over her bandaged ribs. She smoothed the folds of velvet, wincing at how the fabric pressed against the fresh stitches. Her reflection in a small polished mirror revealed a pallid face, circles beneath her eyes, hair tangled and stiff from dried sweat. She raked her fingers through it as best she could. "This will have to suffice," she said, trying for a wry smile. Ned escorted her out, and they made their way back toward the throne room. The halls were less chaotic now. Soldiers had hauled the dead away, leaving only dark stains where the battles had raged. Hushed conversation drifted from corners where men and women whispered about what had transpired. The Red Keep felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of ruler Lyanna Stark would be. When they neared the throne room, she paused just outside the broad doors. Two guards wearing Stark cloaks stood to attention. "What awaits me within?" she asked softly. Ned glanced at the door, his expression hardening. Robert Tywin Lannister, a score of lords from the Crownlands, and some from the Reach who arrived after hearing rumor of the king's death. A handful of Targaryen loyalists in chains. They're all looking to see which way the winds blow. She squared her shoulders. "Then let's show them." Summoning her courage, she gestured for the guards to open the doors. The throne room felt different under daylight. Fires smoldered in the braziers, but bright sun streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A hush fell the moment she stepped inside. Gathered at the far end were a cluster of nobles. Some dressed in fine silks, others in battered armor. Robert stood with a few of his retainers off to one side, face set in a tense scowl. Dominating the center was Tywin Lannister. He wore a cloak of crimson so vibrant it seemed to stain the air. His pale green eyes fixed on Lyanna with an unsettling calm. Beside him stood men with the gold lion on their breastplates, silent as statues. Every eye followed her as she advanced down the aisle. Her wound throbbed, but she forced herself to walk with measured grace, her chin high. The Mad King's body was gone, she noted with relief, though she could still sense the ghost of him in every corner. The Iron Throne loomed at the dais. She imagined how it would look to the onlookers, a slight figure in velvet approaching that monstrous seat of swords. Would they see a child playing at crowns, or a queen who had seized power in one furious act? She paused at the dais steps, turning slowly to face the lords. Robert inclined his head but did not smile. Tywin's expression was inscrutable as he bowed, just deep enough to show a veneer of respect, but not so low as to hint at subservience. "Lord Tywin," Lyanna said, her voice echoing despite her nerves. "You come to us at a dire time. The king is dead, and the realm bleeds." Tywin straightened, folding his hands behind his back. "It is indeed a dire time, your grace," he said, voice cool and assured. "I grieve for the horrors visited upon King's Landing by Aerys madness." His gaze flicked briefly to Robert, then back to Lyanna. Had my counsel been heeded earlier, perhaps much bloodshed might have been spared. She sensed the meaning beneath his words. Had Aerys accepted the Lannister host within the city's walls sooner, Tywin would have engineered a coup that placed his own men at the heart of power. How many times had Tywin orchestrated such cunning alliances? She didn't doubt he was already weighing how to manipulate her, but she offered him a measured nod. "You have come now, and if your intentions are peaceful, I welcome you." Murmurs swept through the watching crowd. Robert remained silent, watching from beneath furrowed brows. Tywin spoke again, voice carrying easily across the hall. "I live to serve the realm, your grace. The Lannister host stands ready to restore order in the city if you should require additional protection." There it was, an offer that sounded helpful. But beneath it lay the possibility of Tywin's men swarming the capital, securing every vantage point. She could imagine the Lannister lions perched in the heart of King's Landing, an occupying force that she might not easily dismiss later. She kept her tone neutral. "I thank you for the offer, Lord Tywin. Rest assured that my loyal soldiers, along with the forces led by Lord Baratheon and my brother Ned Stark, have secured the city's gates. Your presence is welcome, so long as you abide by my rule and do not harry the small folk." She saw a slight flicker in Tywin's eyes, a momentary tension that signaled he was not pleased by her refusal to rely on his host. But he inclined his head smoothly. "As you wish, your grace." She let her gaze drift across the assembled lords, noticing how many hung on every exchange. This was the first glimpse they had of their new queen, whether she was a mere figurehead or if she held genuine authority. Robert stood with arms crossed, silent. Ned hovered a step behind Lyanna. She lifted her voice to address them all. "The war need not continue. Aerys Targaryen is gone. His nearest heir, Prince Rhaegar, also fallen. The Targaryen hold on the throne is ended. This city belongs now to the realm, and I swear to rule justly, so that no more men need die in vain." She paused, glancing at the Targaryen loyalists in chains. "As for those who fought for the Targaryens out of duty or fear, I will not execute them if they lay down their arms. I desire no further slaughter." A murmur of surprise and relief spread through the hall. Her heart pounded at the gamble she had just taken. An unrelenting wave of punishment against Targaryen loyalists might quell immediate threats, but it would sow more resentment in the future. Mercy might win her allies, or invite treachery. She had to hope that forging trust now would prevent the realm from tearing itself apart. When her gaze returned to Tywin, she caught the faintest shadow of a smile on his lips, as though he found her stance either admirable or dangerously naive. He bowed his head again, saying nothing more. Robert cleared his throat then, a rumble that made the assembled lords fall silent. He stepped forward, hammer held across his chest. "The Queen has spoken. Any who defy her rule risk bringing more war upon us all. House Baratheon stands with her." It was a sparse endorsement, lacking the warmth she might have hoped for, but enough for the assembled men to know that Robert Baratheon was not challenging her claim. Some of the lords touched sword hilts or bent their knees in a show of acquiescence. Others looked uneasy, likely remembering their own part in the rebellion, having followed Robert, thinking he would ascend. Lyanna felt her wound throb, her body screaming with fatigue. But she kept her stance strong, ensuring her voice carried. Those who would pledge fealty, do so now, and you will be received with honor. Those who cannot abide a Stark upon the throne, speak, and we will find a solution that spares further bloodshed, if such a solution can be found. For a moment, the tension in the room pressed in. Lord Redwine from the Reach took an uncertain step forward and knelt, looking up with cautious hope. Your Grace, I yield the loyalty of the Arbor. May the realm know peace again. He bowed his head. She saw a flicker of relief in his eyes, as though uncertain if mercy truly awaited him. She nodded in acceptance. Others followed, dropping to kneel. Some pledged themselves to the new queen in halting words. The Targaryen loyalists in chains looked on, some with despair, others with defiance. But no one voiced outright challenge. Not when the Mad King lay rotting, and Robert Baratheon stood near, hammered fists itching for a reason to crush rebellion. When the last of the lords who wished to kneel had done so, Lyanna took a slow breath. I thank you for your oaths. The realm needs its lords. We must move forward. In the days ahead, I shall form a new council to guide us. The city must be repaired, the fields rezoned, and the threat of hidden wildfire eliminated. You will each have a part to play in restoring stability. For now, rest. Tend your wounded. I expect no further bloodshed within these walls. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over them. Dismissed. The tension broke, and the men murmured among themselves. Some drifted forward to speak with Robert or Ned. Others filtered out to attend to their retinues. In the midst of this, Tywin Lannister stepped toward Lyanna, his measured steps echoing on the stone. She tensed, aware that Ned stiffened at her side. Tywin's expression remained carefully neutral. Your Grace, he said, his voice lower now that the rest of the hall had fallen into a general murmur. I trust you will be naming a hand of the Queen soon. There are many matters that require a firm and experienced hand. Pardons, rebuilding, the distribution of titles and lands once held by Targaryen supporters. His calm tones suggested that he considered himself the obvious choice, or at least that he wished to gauge her inclinations. She felt Ned at her side, silent but radiating tension. She remembered how she had asked him the night before to be her hand. She had not yet formally named him, but in her heart, she knew it must be so. Ned was the one she trusted, the one who would never betray her. Tywin, for all his competence, was a cunning man whose loyalty she could never be certain of. And Robert, no. She could not saddle Robert with that burden, not when he still seemed to struggle so openly with what had befallen them. She met Tywin's gaze, refusing to be cowed by his presence, though the man was a living legend of ruthlessness. You're correct. I will name my hand soon. Someone I trust absolutely to guide the realm. She saw the flicker of calculation behind his eyes. Of course, Your Grace. Should you desire my counsel, I stand ready. He inclined his head. It was the posture of a man who was not truly used to bowing. I shall await your summons in the Solar. In the meantime, my men will remain on good behavior. I trust you will do the same with yours. She forced a thin smile. Indeed. The city has endured enough horrors. She watched him withdraw, his scarlet cloak trailing behind. No doubt he was already plotting a dozen contingencies if she did not name him hand, or if she dared to spurn House Lannister's ambitions. But she felt no compulsion to yield to him. She was queen now by right of conquest, and she would not surrender her new rule to Tywin's controlling grasp. Only when he had gone did she turn to Ned. She could see the question in his eyes. Ned, she said softly, I asked you last night to kneel to me. I also told you I wanted you as my hand. Will you accept, formally, before all these lords? She thought she saw him swallow hard. He had never craved power, never sought the intrigues of court. But he knew, as well as she, that the realm needed a leader it could trust. Someone with honor and a firm moral compass. He bent a knee. I do accept, Your Grace. I swear to serve you faithfully, for the good of the realm. A wave of relief and warmth broke over her. "Thank you, Ned." Rises the hand of the queen. She helped him to his feet, ignoring the fresh wave of pain that shot through her bandaged side. A few lords who lingered nearby overheard and bowed to Ned in acknowledgement. The swirl of change never ceased, it seemed. But at least one pillar of her life was in place. Robert, who had been speaking tersely with a couple of his bannermen, turned just in time to see Ned's rise. Their gazes locked across the hall. Lyanna braced herself for his reaction, but he gave a curt nod, then resumed whatever conversation he was having, as though he accepted it too. Perhaps some part of him was glad to be relieved of the burden of regency. She pressed a hand to her side, exhaustion clawing at her again. The day had only just begun, and already she felt ready to collapse. She must hold steady. Too many lords watched her every move. One sign of weakness and men like Tywin might strike. She thought of the empty seat behind her, the Iron Throne. She did not want to sit in it again just yet. She'd had her fill of that monstrous seat for one day. But she realized with a pang of irony that the queen likely belonged upon her throne to hold any more formal audiences. Still, she feared that if she settled onto those swords again, the barbs might as well press into her heart. Ned leaned close, his voice low. "We've had no official word about the Targaryen children. Some rumors say they fled to Dragonstone. Others claim they were smuggled across the narrow sea. What shall we do if they are found?" "Ben Peter." Lyanna's stomach twisted. "I cannot punish babes for the sins of their father," she whispered. "If they are found, I will not have them murdered, Ned. The realm will judge me harshly for it, and rightly so. I only want to ensure no Targaryen rises to burn us anew." He nodded, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "Then we must track them carefully. Tywin might have other plans." She closed her eyes briefly, envisioning how easily the Lannisters might hire assassins or orchestrate a quiet end to the last Targaryens, sealing off that threat forever. But that would stain the crown in innocent blood. She would not begin her reign that way, no matter how cunning or practical some lords might consider it. She exhaled shakily. "Yes, we'll remain vigilant, but if it comes to war again..." She couldn't finish the thought. Another wave of exhaustion hit, making the chamber tilt before her eyes. Ned steadied her. He guided her gently out of the central space, letting the onlookers shift their gaze elsewhere. A swirl of courtiers began to fill the hall, some carrying ledgers and parchments, others trailing behind the lords to discuss alliances, lands, and new appointments. The city was stirring after its long nightmare. Rebuilding began in a hush, overshadowed by the presence of the Northern Queen who sat where a Targaryen once reigned. A short while later, Lyanna found herself in a smaller audience chamber, seated behind a large wooden table. Ned stood to one side, calmly addressing the queue of lesser lords and officials who came to present themselves. An elderly steward from the city's treasury offered a trembling bow, explaining that Ares had drained the coffers. A group of blacksmiths asked for permission to repair the city's gates. A local septon pleaded for guards to protect the starving orphans in Flea Bottom. The details were overwhelming, yet each was part of the tapestry of ruling. Lyanna forced herself to give reasoned answers, though her head pounded. Each second reaffirmed what a monstrous task lay ahead. Between supplicants, she took sips of watered wine, leaning her elbows on the table. Ned's quiet presence behind her was the only anchor she had. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of Robert prowling the corridors, or heard him barking orders to keep the city calm. She wondered if he would remain in King's Landing or return to the Stormlands if they could salvage any friendship from the embers of their old betrothal. A pang of regret kept hitting her every time she saw that wounded look in his eyes. But she also knew that forging a new alliance with him was vital for the realm. By evening, a meager sense of order began to settle. The city had not erupted into riots. The Lannisters kept to their quarters, the Baratheon men patrolled the streets, and the northern soldiers tried to hold themselves aloof. Still, the Red Keep was brimming with tension. Everyone anticipated some declaration, some grand pronouncement from Lyanna Stark regarding the succession, the shape of her rule. But she could only handle so much in a single day. Night fell slowly, bringing cooler air that blew in through the battered windows. Torches flickered in the corridors. Messengers came and went, bearing dispatches for every corner of Westeros. Ned gently suggested she retire. She refused at first, wanting to continue ensuring no new crisis arose. But at last, when her vision blurred from pain, she conceded. A small cadre of Stark guards escorted her to a different chamber this time, more fitting for a queen than the cramped solar she had slept in before. It was large and ornate, though the Targaryen tapestries had been stripped from the walls. The bed was draped in linens of red and gold from old Targaryen times. She stood in the doorway, feeling oddly numb. This had once been the Mad King's personal chamber, perhaps. Or maybe it belonged to Rhaegar. The sense of ghosts clung to the air. She dismissed all but Ned, feeling the weight of her exhaustion pressing down. He lit a few candles, the dancing flames revealing old furniture with dragon motifs carved along the edges. He looked at her uncertainly. "Do you want me to stay?" She sank onto the bed's edge, letting out a slow, tremulous breath. "No," she managed. "I'll try to sleep. Stand guard outside. But if Robert or Tywin come with some urgent need, I suppose you must wake me." "Monsieur." He hesitated, then nodded. Before he left, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "The city is calmer than it was this morning," he said quietly. "You did well. The realm's fear is easing, if only slightly." She tried to muster a small smile. "Thank you. Good night, Ned." When he was gone, she sat for a long while, staring at the candle flame. Scenes from the past few weeks rushed through her mind in a torrent of images. The war's devastation, the tower where she'd been held, her rescue by Ned, the decision to steal into the Red Keep and kill the Mad King. She replayed those frantic moments behind the Iron Throne, the dagger plunging into flesh, the king's shriek echoing off the walls. Her stomach roiled. She placed a hand to her bandaged ribs, leaning forward until her forehead rested in her palm. She wanted to weep, but the tears would not come. When at last she lay back on the mattress, she stared at the high canopy overhead, carved in twisting shapes of scaled dragons. She felt the hush of the night around her, the murmuring of distant guards, the faint flicker of torches in the corridor. She was in the Mad King's seat of power, draped in the remnants of Targaryen finery. But she was a Stark, through and through. She would carve her own legacy, if the realm allowed it. She would not burn innocence, nor would she yield to the cunning ambitions of men like Tywin Lannister. She would rule with honor, or she would die trying. Her eyelids drooped. Sleep took her in uneven waves, broken by the occasional jolt of pain or the memory of Aerys's dying face. She twitched awake more than once, straining to hear if any threat lurked beyond the door. Yet each time, she found nothing but silence, a silence as heavy as the iron crown she had taken for herself. At some point, exhaustion finally won. The Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, bruised and battered, drifted into a fitful slumber, while her uncertain realm lay waiting beyond the walls, holding its breath for dawn and the promises it might bring. Imyandei, Adeliodapatel. Lyanna woke to the knock of mailed knuckles against heavy wooden doors. At first she was disoriented, eyelids gritty with fatigue, as she stared at strange shadows carved by morning light on the walls. Then memory descended, and with it, the dull ache in her side. She was in the Red Keep, in a chamber once belonging to the Targaryens, having claimed a throne she'd never dreamed of holding. Outside, someone called her name. A guard, perhaps, or one of her new attendants. She inhaled a shaky breath, pushing herself upright. Even that small motion caused pain to flare along her stitched wound. "Enter," she said, fighting to keep the tremor out of her voice. A Stark guardsman appeared, a broad-shouldered fellow with a short beard. "Your Grace," he began in a hushed tone, glancing around at the lavish yet gloomy chamber. "Lord Eddard asked me to see if you're awake. There's a matter requiring your attention in the courtyard." She swept a hand over her tired face, nodding. "I'll come at once." She threw off the thin coverlet and stood slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. She had slept in the same gown she'd worn the day before, too exhausted to remove it. Now it was rumpled, and her hair was a tangled mess down her back. She did what she could to smooth out the creases with her palms, grimacing at how the velvet clung to her. If she wanted to command respect in these precarious early days, she would need at least a semblance of regal bearing. Yet every new motion reminded her of how fragile she felt beneath that facade. She beckoned the guard to step out, while she made a hurried attempt to tidy herself. A quick splash of water from a waiting basin cooled her cheeks. Through a tall, narrow window, she heard roars echoing from the courtyard below. Voices raised in anger or fear. She couldn't quite tell. She tried to quicken her pace, binding her hair with a ribbon she found on the table. With a final sharp breath, she drew herself upright and gestured for the guard to lead on. They navigated the corridor, moving past the battered relics of the previous day's struggle. A few of Robert's soldiers trudged by with grim faces, carrying broken weapons to be melted down. The stench of old blood and charred wood still lingered in the keep, though some of the windows stood open to let in a cleansing breeze. Lyanna forced her chin high, ignoring the dull throb beneath her bandages. She had a throne to protect, a city to govern. No sign of weakness could be afforded. The main doors leading to the courtyard stood ajar. She stepped outside, blinking against the bright, cloudless sky. The air smelled of smoke and dust. A crowd had gathered near the center of the yard, facing a makeshift platform. Lyanna spotted Ned immediately, his face set like stone, and Robert beside him, fists clenched. Beyond them were lines of Lannister men in crimson cloaks, and in front of the platform, a few Targaryen loyalists in chains. The tension was palpable. Whispers hissed through the onlookers, who parted to let Lyanna through. She walked toward the dais, aware of every gaze upon her. Ned bowed his head when she arrived, though his eyes held relief at her presence. Robert inclined his head as well, a fraction more stiff. Standing at the edge of the makeshift scaffold was Lord Tywin himself, resplendent in crimson and gold. He held himself with composed patience, as though he had orchestrated an event he now wished her to ratify. She forced her voice to carry. "What is this gathering, Lord Tywin?" He turned, bowing just enough to observe the forms of respect. "Good morrow, Your Grace. I regret the disturbance so early, but I believed it best we address this swiftly. These men," he gestured to the haggard Targaryen loyalist, "were seized by my soldiers in the western wards of the city. Apparently, they had barricaded a small storehouse and set themselves up with enough provisions to hold out for days. They refused to surrender. My men overcame them last night." Lyanna's gaze fell on the captives. They were disheveled, bruised, eyes grim with hopelessness. One of them had a fresh cut across his brow, dried blood caked in his eyebrows. Another, older man with thinning hair, glowered with something that resembled defiance. She saw fear too in his trembling posture. The war had ended for them only when Tywin's men battered down their last refuge. Now, they were at her mercy. The crowd around the courtyard watched in strained silence, waiting to see how the new queen would dispense justice. She stepped closer, ignoring the prickle of pain beneath her ribs. "And how did you plan to deal with them, Lord Tywin?" He raised a brow with cool composure. "I was prepared to execute them for treason, as an example that the Targaryen cause is finished. But," his voice slowed, "I recalled your words about mercy, Your Grace. Perhaps you would prefer a different approach." She realized his words were a test. He was inviting her to show whether her mercy was genuine or mere rhetoric. At the same time, an unspoken challenge lurked. If she spared them all too freely, she might look weak to the realm's more pragmatic lords. She stood, letting a slow breath steady her. "They barricaded themselves, you say? Did they kill any of your men in resisting capture?" Tywin's gaze flicked to one of his officers, who cleared his throat. "We lost 2 men taking them, Your Grace, and a third was gravely wounded." That twisted her stomach. She glanced at the captives again, seeing the murder in their eyes. Whether out of desperation or fanatic loyalty to the Targaryen crown, they had chosen to fight on. She weighed what that meant in this new order she was trying to forge. If she were to let them go scot-free, that might anger families who lost loved ones. Yet, executing them all would do little to quell the fear that she was no different from Aerys. She felt Robert's stare, heavy on her profile, and Ned's concern from the other side. The crowd's hush pressed in. "At last," she said, "2 men dead and 1 wounded in your attempt to cling to a fallen king." Her tone was not unkind, but neither was it gentle. "Do you deny the charges?" The older prisoner spat at her feet. The guards jerked him back. "We serve the true king," he hissed, "not some northern usurper bitch." A ripple of shock and outrage spread through the crowd. Lyanna felt Robert tense behind her. She saw Tywin's lips quirk, as if waiting for her to demonstrate how she would handle such an insult. Ned took a single step forward, but she lifted a hand to still him. Her heart pounded, but she kept her face impassive. "You fight for a ghost," she said quietly, meeting the older man's furious gaze. "The Mad King is gone. By my hand. Your bloodshed will not bring him back. The next time any man stands against the peace I am trying to forge, he will meet the same fate he has forced upon others." She turned her gaze to the entire group of captives. "This city has spilled enough blood. Were it not for your attempt to resist the new order by force, I might have spared all of you. You took innocent lives, men who served no tyrant. Only the realms knew peace. That cannot go unpunished." She inclined her head to one side. "You will forfeit your lands and titles, if any you possess. You will serve in menial labor under guard for 10 years. If any of you attempt further violence, you will hang. Am I understood?" A stunned pause followed. It wasn't the mass execution Tywin had likely assumed she would order. But neither was it total forgiveness. She saw the flicker of relief among some of the captives, who realized they would keep their heads. The older man glared, chest heaving with fury. Still, he gave a curt nod. "We understand," he muttered, voice cracking. Robert let out a breath, and Ned shifted as though relaxing tension in his shoulders. Tywin studied her with a guarded expression. She could practically hear him calculating how her sentence might be perceived across the realm. But out loud he said only, "As you command, Your Grace." He gestured, and his men escorted the prisoners away. The crowd began to disperse, hushed whispers trailing after them. Lyanna turned to Ned. "There must be a place within the city to hold such men until we can assign them to labor. They'll need close watching." "Then not shy." Ned inclined his head. "I'll see it done." He glanced toward Robert. "We can repurpose some of the old vaults near the mud gate, though we'll have to clear them of debris first." Robert, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet, gave a short nod. "I'll send men to help. The city's full of rubble anyway." He scowled, scanning the courtyard. "They're alive, though I'd not have spared the one who spat at you." Lyanna's lips tightened. "Killing him would bring no solace to the families of the guards who died. I'd rather have him labor for years, pondering his mistakes." "Mace." Robert grunted, apparently unconvinced, but unwilling to argue in public. "We'll see how well he labors with that rotten tongue of his." He hefted his warhammer onto his shoulder with a restless shift. "Tywin wanted a spectacle, and you denied him. Let's hope he doesn't use it as an excuse to undermine you elsewhere." She exhaled. "Tywin will test me at every turn. Better he see that I won't bend to his demands on matters of justice. That alone might dissuade him from further gambits." Robert made no immediate reply. She saw in his eyes a tangle of disappointment and grudging respect. She suspected part of him wished he were the one dispensing justice. But the moment for that had passed, and she felt relief that he had not pressed the matter. Step by step, she was establishing her authority. After the crowd thinned, she turned to Ned again. "I want the city scoured for more pockets of Targaryen loyalists, peacefully if we can, but firmly if we must. We can't allow more hidden holdouts." He nodded. "Agreed. I'll send out patrols with clear instructions not to brutalize the small folk. We can't have the city view us as conquerors. The rumor of your mercy, in this instance, might help." "Then so on now." She felt the ache in her body intensify. Standing so long was draining, though she tried not to show it. "Good. Let's see it done." She turned to Robert, her gaze searching. "What of the Stormlanders? Have you heard from your lord since the city fell?" His expression clouded. "Some are on their way here, eager to see what's happened. Others remain in the field, unsure if more fighting is to come. I'll have ravens sent, commanding them to stand down. Word will spread that the Mad King is gone. The war's done." A faint sneer touched his mouth. "You'll see how quickly some of them come groveling for a place at your table." She tried to find a flicker of humor, but only felt sadness. "I need their loyalty, groveling or not. Let them come. The sooner we have the kingdom's lords aligned, the sooner we can rebuild. Robert looked away, nodding curtly. I'll see to it. If you need me, I'll be at the training yard or the war room. He turned and strode off without waiting for a farewell. The weight of his footsteps seemed heavier than usual. She watched him go, wishing she could ease his bitterness. But there was too much between them. Too many shattered hopes. Ned touched her arm lightly. Shall we return to the council chambers? She forced her attention away from Robert's retreating figure. Yes, she said. Summon whoever's available. We need to discuss the next steps. How to feed the city. How to restore order to the Crown lands. There won't be time for rest. He gave her a sympathetic look, but said nothing, leading her toward the keep's interior. The day passed in a blur of audiences and decisions, each small crisis demanding her time. She met with the city's bakers who complained of a grain shortage. She heard from ship captains newly arrived, bearing the news that the ports had halted trade for weeks due to the war. With Ned at her side, she commanded gold from the dwindling treasury be used to purchase supplies from ships willing to sell. The sums were meager, and she could see the dismay on the city officials' faces. King's Landing had not been prosperous even before the siege. Now it teetered on famine. When midday shadows stretched across the floor, Tywin presented himself again at the door to the council chamber, his posture impeccably polite. Lyanna noticed how the guards stiffened, unsure whether to bar him or wave him in. She raised a hand, granting him entry. She sat at the long table with Ned, a scattering of ledgers and sealed parchments before them. It felt surreal to greet Tywin Lannister in the place once reserved for Targaryen small councils. He inclined his head. Your Grace, Lord Eddard. His voice was calm, offering them no read of his thoughts. I come to speak of House Lannister's future in your reign. My men and I cannot remain idle in the city forever. Perhaps we might formalize my stance. Lyanna studied him for a moment, trying to parse the subtle play of tension in his bearing. Go on, Lord Tywin. He folded his hands behind his back. As you know, my house has long held dominion over the Westerlands, a position of wealth and influence. I wish to reaffirm my loyalty to the crown. To do so, I propose a marriage alliance. My daughter Cersei is of age, and a union could solidify our bond. House Lannister's resources could help rebuild the city, fill the coffers Aerys drained, and you as queen would gain a powerful ally in the west. She exchanged a glance with Ned, whose face hardened. This offer was the sort of proposition Tywin was known for. A means of seizing a foothold in the new power structure. If she agreed, she might tie House Lannister more tightly to the throne, but at the cost of owing Tywin a portion of the realm's future. And who was the intended groom? She had not made any arrangement for her own marriage, nor had she any intention of wedding again so soon, not after the tumult she'd just endured. Would Tywin suggest a marriage between his daughter and some close ally of hers? Or was he brazen enough to propose the queen herself wed a Lannister? She kept her voice steady. It's an interesting offer. But if you're suggesting I wed your daughter to someone in my family, that would leave only Ned, and he's already wed to Catelyn Tully. We've no immediate unwed Starks, aside from my younger brothers, still in the north. Neddy. Tywin's expression didn't shift. I am aware, Your Grace. My daughter is quite beautiful and accomplished. I suspect many a lord might desire her hand. My preference would be to see her married to a man close in station to you, someone who might stand as your principal supporter. Ned set aside the parchment in his hands, fixing Tywin with a cold stare. You presume too much, Lord Tywin. This is a realm in turmoil, not a chessboard for you to arrange as you please. Show. Tywin returned the look with measured calm. I do not presume, Lord Eddard. I merely present an avenue by which House Lannister can become a permanent, reliable ally. The throne stands to gain significantly from such a bond. Rebuilding a kingdom costs dearly, and the Westerlands have coin to spare. Lyanna closed her eyes for a moment, grappling with how to respond. She recognized the danger of spurning Tywin outright, but she also disliked the notion of forging alliances on such manipulative terms. I'll consider the matter, Lord Tywin, but I will not be rushed. My immediate concerns are feeding the city and preventing further bloodshed. Of course, Your Grace, he said, his tone courteous enough. "Take all the time you need to deliberate. In the meantime, shall I assume the Lannister host remains as a friendly garrison? Or would you prefer us to stand down to avoid alarming the populace?" She breathed in slowly. He was offering to withdraw, something that might please her, but also threatening to withdraw the resources the city might need to maintain security. "I'd not turn away your men if they are truly under my command. I do not want their presence to become an occupation." Tywin inclined his head. "They will follow your orders naturally." It was a pledge, but she sensed the potential for betrayal if ever he saw advantage in it. Yet for now, she could do little but nod. "Very well. Keep them stationed, but coordinate with Lord Baratheon and my own commanders to ensure no confusion. We'll see if the city can be stabilized soon." "Mayor." He seemed content with that answer, bowed low, and departed with the measured stride of a man who believed he'd planted seeds for future gain. Lyanna exhaled sharply the moment he was gone, rubbing the ache between her temples. Ned muttered, "He never does anything without a scheme behind it. We must be cautious, or he'll have half the court in his pocket." She pressed her lips together. "I know. The Lannisters are too powerful to dismiss outright, but I'll not let Tywin think he can marry off his daughter and rule through me." "So good," Ned said. "We will find other ways to fill the treasury without depending on him, though it may be harder. Perhaps once the realm knows of your coronation, taxes will flow again. In time, we can rebuild." She wished she shared his optimism. The realm was vast, and even if the crownlands quieted, the lords farther away might resist paying homage to a queen from the north. The thought of traveling across Westeros to secure alliances made her stomach twist. "I need to show them stability. A coronation would help, yes. The faith will expect a public ceremony, so the realm can witness my crowning." Ned set a hand on hers. "We can speak with the High Septon. He's likely holed up in the Great Sept, fearful of retribution after Aerys's demise. If you approach him with courtesy, it might ease his concerns." She nodded, though the idea of standing before a throng of strangers in an elaborate ceremony chilled her. She was accustomed to the old gods, the silent weirwoods, not the pomp of southern courts. But she knew how important the faith was to most of Westeros. Without its blessing, half the realm might doubt her legitimacy. "Fine. We'll arrange it, as soon as the city is calm enough for such a gathering." They worked through the afternoon, receiving more lords who came to pledge themselves or inquire about the new policies. Some were opportunists, seeking land confiscated from Targaryen loyalists. Others bore gifts in the hopes of winning favor with the Wolf Queen. Lyanna found herself smiling politely, curtly refusing blatant attempts at bribery. She watched Ned grow increasingly weary, though he never complained. His presence at her side gave her the fortitude to maintain a stern facade. She wondered how long either of them could keep this pace before collapsing. By dusk, they allowed themselves a brief respite for a meal. In the great hall, where the Targaryen sigils had been stripped from the pillars, tables were laid out with a sparse feast for the new court. Meager though it was, it served to reassure the city's officials that the castle was functional. Lyanna seated herself at the high table, ignoring the twisting discomfort in her gut. Her side felt hot beneath the bandages, suggesting it might be inflamed. Each time she glanced around, she expected the ghosts of House Targaryen to appear, outraged at her presence. Instead, she met the curious stares of courtiers, uncertain how to address this new queen who had come from the north like a winter storm. Robert was there, seated at the same table, though a gap yawned between them. He devoured his meal in stoic silence. Occasionally, a lord or lady approached him, stammering compliments or entreaties. He brushed them off with curt nods, drained his cup, and stared into the middle distance. Lyanna's chest constricted at the sight. The day had been so frantic that they'd scarcely had a moment alone. Could she ease his sorrow, or was it doomed to remain a bitter wedge between them? When she could bear it no longer, she set aside her half-eaten meal and rose, moving to where Robert sat. He glanced up, eyes hooded with fatigue. A hush fell over the nearby attendants, who watched to see if their queen and the great warrior would clash. Lyanna inclined her head, forcing calm. "Might we speak privately, Robert?" He flexed his jaw, seeming to weigh the request. Then he stood abruptly, leaving his cup on the table. "Hey," he said, voice gruff. "Let's go." They walked out of the great hall, leaving startled onlookers behind. Lyanna led him to a quiet corner of the keep's courtyard, where a broken fountain trickled with meager water. Night had fallen, and the torches set along the walls cast flickering shadows. She turned to face Robert. He set his warhammer aside, letting it lean against the crumbling stone. She saw how tension lined his broad shoulders, how the old flame in his eyes had dimmed. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know this must be difficult. I never intended to steal your dream of the crown." He let out a bitter laugh, rough with emotion. "Steal? You spared King's Landing from the Mad King. You did what I—" He shook his head. "All those months I spent raging across the battlefields, vowing to put Aerys's head on a spike, and in the end, you took him down with a dagger. It chafes, Lyanna. I won't lie. Then, She folded her arms against her midsection, pain flaring under her stitches. "I never meant to slight your valor. I did what was necessary to stop him before he destroyed the city. If I'd waited for your arrival, it might have been too late." He nodded reluctantly, gaze dropping to the fountain's trickling water. "I know, and I can't say I would have done differently. But you took the throne as well. The rebels followed me, believing I'd be their king once the war was won." His voice grew softer. "Now they see you in that seat. Some resent it. Some are confused. I'm confused. She swallowed hard. "They need not be. If you wish it, I can name you as my co-ruler." He raised a hand to halt her. "No, that's not what I want. It would feel like a favor or a crumb tossed to a hungry dog. I fought because I believed in justice. I believed the Targaryens had to be deposed. It's done. Let me stand as Lord of the Stormlands or Warden of the South, or whatever fine title the realm demands. I guard the realm with my life. But I can't play the part of some overshadowed consort." She lowered her eyes. "Then remain my staunchest ally. The realm still sees you as the hero who vanquished Rhaegar on the Trident. I don't want to diminish that. If we stand united, no one will dare challenge the new order." He stared at her for a moment, pain etched in his features. "We were to wed once," he said in a low voice. "I dreamed of building a grand future with you, giving you a crown. But now, the dream is ashes. You took your own crown with blood. Gods, Lyanna. I can't begin to parse what that means for us." She felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. "I know," she whispered. "I can't undo any of it. I can only move forward. Perhaps in time we'll find a new path. But I won't hold you to a betrothal if your heart isn't in it. Nor would it make sense for the realm if you harbor resentment. You must do what's right for yourself now." He exhaled in a trembling sigh. "Maybe I just need time. Let me fight the realm's enemies, quell the bandits, secure the Stormlands. Let me do it with the same fervor I had for slaying Targaryens. When I've done enough, maybe I'll find peace." His eyes flicked to her bandaged side. "And you? Don't push yourself too hard. I'd hate to watch you die in that cursed chair you've claimed." Whining pain. A painful knot formed in her chest. "I'll try not to," she managed, forcing a small, wry smile. "Though it may be a near thing, if every day is like this." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. Then he reached out as though to clasp her hand, but he stopped short. A flicker of old longing in his eyes. "Gods be good I loved you once, Lyanna. Maybe I still do. But I don't know how to love a queen who took my throne." He let the words hang in the cool air. Then he picked up his warhammer with a jerk of his arm. "I'll go see to the patrols now." She swallowed and nodded, letting him depart. The hollow echo of his footsteps in the courtyard made her heart ache. She stood by the broken fountain a moment longer, gazing at her reflection in the dark water. Her face looked drawn, as though she'd aged years in the space of a single day. No crown perched on her head now, yet she felt its weight. She wanted to cry but couldn't. There was too much to be done. She turned on her heel and made her way back inside, where the flickers of torchlight played against the old stone corridors. She spent the rest of the evening meeting small groups of soldiers, ensuring that her new orders for the city were clear. She found Ned again, and he escorted her to the top of a rampart so she could gaze over King's Landing at night. The city lights were sparse. A hush lay over the streets. The day's tension weighed on everyone. Even from that vantage, the swirl of rubble and burnt sections of the city were clear to see. Fires from recent skirmishes had left blackened scars, and the towers of the Red Keep seemed to loom like silent witnesses. Far below, the Blackwater rushed on. She imagined the ghosts of Rhaegar's final stand drifting on its currents. Ned stood with her, hands resting on the cold battlement stones. "You've done well so far," he said softly. "It might not feel that way, but I see no better path. Mercy with the holdouts, caution with Tywin, an offer of unity to Robert. It's more than many would manage in your position." She tried to glean comfort from his words, though her throat felt tight. "I'm only afraid we'll face fresh challenges tomorrow. War is messy. The rest of Westeros might not accept a Northern Queen so easily. What of the Reach, the Iron Islands, or even Dorne? They allied with the Targaryens. Will they raise new banners against me?" Bender 10. Ned considered. Mace Tyrell and his bannermen are still licking wounds from the war. They might hesitate to rise again unless they believe they can restore a Targaryen figurehead. As for Dorne, they lost Prince Lewin on the Trident. Prince Doran Martell is cunning, but I doubt he wants open conflict anew. Still, we'll need to send envoys, reassure them you don't mean to punish them for Aerys' crime. She let out a breath that frosted in the cool night air. And the Iron Islands? Balon Greyjoy might see the realm's turmoil as an opportunity to cause havoc. A faint grimace crossed Ned's face. "We'll send a show of naval force soon. Remind them the throne is not so weak." She allowed herself a moment of silence, only the distant crash of waves and the nighttime chirp of insects to fill it. Beneath her calm exterior, exhaustion seeped into her bones. "I'll do all that tomorrow," she said at last. "For now I need to rest, or I'll keel over on these stones." Ned nodded, gently laying a hand on her shoulder. "Come, sister. Let's find you a bed that doesn't remind you of Aerys' blood. There must be a guest chamber fit for a queen somewhere in this keep." "Must he?" She followed him down from the ramparts, her legs shaky from a day spent on her feet. At last, they located a smaller suite near the Maiden Vault. Rooms that had once been used by Targaryen princesses in some distant era. The bed was well appointed, and the walls had been stripped of Targaryen heraldry. Lyanna sank onto the mattress, each breath bringing a flare of discomfort in her bandaged side. Ned directed a pair of guards to stand outside, then lingered near her. She looked up at him in the candlelight. "You should rest too, Ned. We both need our wits about us come morning." He nodded. "I will. But first, do you need anything? Wine? A maester?" She managed a tight smile. "I'll be fine. Go." She reached out to clasp his hand briefly. "Thank you. For everything." He squeezed her hand, then released it. "Sleep, Lyanna. Tomorrow will be kinder, I hope." With that, he withdrew, and she was alone in the flickering glow of 2 small candles set on a dresser. She removed her shoes, gingerly slid out of the gown, and examined her bandages. The linen was stained with fresh red in one spot. Maybe she had moved too much, stretching the stitches. She clenched her teeth and pressed a clean cloth to it, hoping to quell the bleeding. The pain was tolerable compared to the mental weight she carried, but it was a reminder that her body couldn't endure constant strain without consequence. Exhaustion soon overcame her. She blew out the candles, letting darkness enfold the chamber. Despite the swirl of fears in her mind, her tired flesh demanded sleep. Gradually, her breathing slowed, and she drifted into uneasy dreams. At dawn, she awoke with a start, nightmares of green wildfire flickering behind her eyes. For a moment she couldn't recall where she was. Then she saw the pale morning light seeping through the shutters and remembered. The Queen of Westeros. The Wolf Queen? Some whispered. She sank her head back against the pillow, feeling her heart hammer. So many tasks lay ahead that it felt impossible to face them without dread. But soon duty pressed. Servants brought a basin of water, fresh linens, and word that Tywin was calling a council. She frowned. sending the servants away long enough to dress in a simpler gown, pale gray with subtle silver trim. Her side twinged with each motion, but at least the bleeding had stopped. She braided her hair with more care than she had the previous day, wanting to appear composed. Then she steeled herself and left the chamber. Ned was waiting outside, speaking softly with one of the guards. He turned to greet her with a nod, though concern shone in his eyes. "We've had visitors at the gate. Lord Varys arrived. Apparently he was in hiding while the city fell. He says he has urgent news about Targaryen supporters abroad." "Bear." She breathed in sharply. Varys the Spider, the master of whisperers, had served Aerys Targaryen for years. She remembered the swirl of rumors about his spies reaching every corner of the world. Now he wished to serve her? Or was this some trick? Does he come willingly? Ned lifted a brow. He claims he wishes only to serve whoever sits the throne. I don't trust him, but it might be unwise to discard his knowledge. She nodded, reluctant. All right, we'll hear him, but carefully. Together, they walked through the Red Keep's labyrinth of corridors, heading for the small council chamber. Lyanna dreaded finding Tywin already seated there, orchestrating the day's agenda. She steeled herself, remembering that she was queen. None of these men, cunning or bold, outranked her. When she stepped into the chamber, her gaze immediately found Tywin standing near the table, arms crossed behind his back. Sir Barristan Selmy was present too, his expression grave, as if each moment of this new court pained him. Seated in a corner chair was Varys, a plump man with shaved head, draped in fine robes. He sprang up when Lyanna entered, offering a sweeping bow so low that the sleeves of his garments swept the floor. "Your Grace, at last," he said in a soft, airy voice. "How relieved I am to see you in good health. I was terribly worried during the transitional period, but now we can begin anew, can't we?" Lyanna studied him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "You served Aerys. Why have you returned, Varys?" He straightened, pressing his hands together. "I served the realm, as I always have. Aerys was the named king, so I gave him what counsel I could, though he seldom listened. Now you wear the crown, so I offer you the same service. I humbly suggest that you could use my little birds, as they say, to ferret out threats before they strike." "No one," Tywin spoke, his tone clipped. "Lord Varys claims to have knowledge of Targaryen loyalists scurrying across the narrow sea, agents who might try to rally foreign support. He suggests you dispatch immediate spies or envoys to ensure they do not amass an army on Essos shores." Lyanna's heart tightened. Of course the Targaryens might still have supporters abroad, especially if the rumors were true that the young prince and princess had escaped. She pressed her fingers to the table's edge. "What do you recommend, Varys?" He swept forward, clasping his hands before him. "Send a trusted envoy to Pentosmere and beyond. Someone who can quietly assess if the Targaryen heirs have found refuge or allies. At the same time, keep watch in King's Landing for any infiltrators. My network remains at your disposal." Ned's voice was tinged with suspicion. "Why would you remain loyal now, when you could just as easily flee overseas?" Varys offered a simpering smile. "I have no taste for a life of exile, my lord. My best interests lie in serving the power that holds the realm's seat. And if I may say so, your Grace's mercy thus far suggests a kinder rule than Aerys. I prefer that." Lyanna weighed the risk. Varys was cunning enough to be a double agent if it suited him. But she also remembered that men like him often ensured stability by playing all sides. "Very well, Varys. You may continue as Master of Whisperers for the time being. But know that if I catch you betraying me, I will not show you the mercy I showed those men in the courtyard." "And he inclined his head with every appearance of sincerity. "I understand, your Grace. I live to serve." She fought a wave of unease. Tywin cleared his throat then, as if impatient with the pomp. "We have more pressing matters, your Grace. The High Septon has agreed to meet you at the Great Septi, should you wish to arrange a coronation. A symbol of your legitimacy, which we all understand is sorely needed." She didn't like how he phrased that, but she nodded. "Yes, I'll go to him today, Sir Barristan, will you accompany me? The people should see the new queen openly, not cowering behind guards. Barristan's eyes flicked up. She saw that faint sorrow still within them, but he bowed. I will guard you with my life, your grace. Ned offered quietly, I'll join as well. Tywin nodded as if that settled the matter to his satisfaction. Excellent. Perhaps Lord Baratheon should accompany you too, to demonstrate unity. And then... She hesitated. Robert's presence might help quell any rumors of discord, but it could also inflame his personal grief and frustration. Still, the realm needed the show of solidarity. Yes, invite him, she said softly. He may come if he wishes. So it was settled. Their morning would be consumed by a procession through the city to the Great Seep Tea. Varys bowed his exit to prepare what little intelligence he might share. Tywin withdrew to oversee the Lannister men, and Ned went to inform Robert. That left Lyanna momentarily alone in the chamber with Sir Barristan, who lingered by the table, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. She realized she hadn't spoken with him at length since the day she slew Aerys. He must be wrestling with unimaginable conflict. She stood, crossing to him slowly. Sir Barristan. He straightened, his lined face betraying only mild wariness. Your Grace. She paused, unsure how to broach the subject. I know you served Prince Rhaegar for many years. I'm sorry for what this war has cost you. He bowed his head. War costs everyone, Your Grace. The prince was a good man, better than his father. I mourn him, but I saw the atrocities Aerys committed. I would not see the realm burn simply for the sake of a dynasty. Wine. She took a moment to absorb his words. Would Rhaegar have truly been so different from Aerys? She asked quietly. Men speak of him as a tragic hero. Yet the war began because of me, because he took me. Her voice caught on those last words, memories of that time swirling in a haze of confusion and half-truths. Barristan's gaze flicked to her face. I cannot speak to that part of the story, my queen. I was not present. I can only say that Rhaegar believed in prophecy, in destiny. Perhaps he saw you as part of that destiny. I do not know if it was abduction or something more complicated. He paused, his expression solemn. But there is no returning to what was lost. I serve the realm and the throne, as my vows dictate. She nodded, feeling a twist of old hurt. Then I'm grateful for your loyalty. If there is a Targaryen threat rising, I hope I can rely on your sword for the good of the realm. He bowed again, more deeply. You have it. I will not betray my oaths. And I pray we find a path to peace. Nani. She felt the finality in his tone, knew that in his heart he still grieved Rhaegar. Whatever feelings existed about her role in the war, and Rhaegar's abduction, would remain unspoken for now. She murmured a quiet thanks and excused herself, leaving him to his silent reflections. Soon after, Ned returned, reporting that Robert would join them for the procession. Lyanna braced herself for the journey through the streets. Outside the Red Keep, a small escort assembled. Stark men, Baratheons, a few Lannisters. Sir Barristan wore his white cloak, which billowed behind him in the breeze. Robert arrived astride a tall destrier, wearing a polished breastplate with a Baratheon stag. His hammer rested across his saddle. Despite the tension between them, Lyanna felt a flicker of gratitude at his willingness to stand by her side in public. They descended through the gate of the Red Keep onto the city's winding streets. The day was bright and warm, the sky a perfect pale blue. Crowds gathered on either side of the narrow thoroughfare, craning their necks to see the Northern Queen. A hush fell as Lyanna's party passed. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes gazing upon the woman who had slain the Mad King. Some looked hopeful, others wary. Whispers traveled like wildfire. She's the Wolf Girl. She killed Aerys with a dagger. A Stark on the throne. What next? She sat stiffly astride her own horse, ignoring the jostling pain in her side. Ned rode beside her, scanning the crowd for threats. Robert led from the front, jaw set. Barristan took a protective flank position. Their progress was slow, halted at intervals by throngs of curious onlookers. Lyanna tried to keep her expression calm and regal, though each glance at the half-ruined city stabbed her with pity. Smoke still rose from a few broken dwellings. Children in tattered clothes clung to corners, eyes hollow. She could almost taste their hunger. Eventually, they reached the Hill of the Seven, where the great sept loomed in pale stone grandeur. Its 7 crystal towers caught the sunlight, reflecting a fractured rainbow on the steps. A line of septas and septons waited outside, looking tense and uncertain. At their head stood the high septon, clad in ornate robes. He folded his hands in front of him as Lyanna dismounted. The crowd murmured behind her, packed tightly on the street below. She approached him, Ned just a step behind. The high septon bowed, though not too deeply. "Your Grace, welcome. We have prayed for peace. Perhaps you are the answer to those prayers." She regarded him carefully. "I seek peace, High Septon, and an end to the horrors Eris wrought. I ask your blessing for a coronation in the eyes of the realm." His pale eyes searched her face. "The faith stands ready to confirm the rightful monarch. Yet, you are the first queen to ascend the throne in her own name in many generations." He spoke softly, but the swirl of onlookers heard every word. "Will you swear to uphold the teachings of the Seven and protect the people from tyranny?" She lifted her voice so all might hear. "I swear to protect the people, so that no more kings burn them alive for sport. I come from the north, but even so, I honor the faith's place in the realm. I do not demand you cast aside your beliefs, only that we work together for a better future." A hush passed over the assembled septas and septons. Then, slowly, the high septon inclined his head. "Then I shall anoint you in a public ceremony as soon as you deem the city ready. Your claim will stand under the light of the Seven." Some in the crowd cheered softly. Others simply stood stunned. Lyanna felt Ned's hand on her shoulder. A quiet show of support. Even Robert allowed a small tilt of his head, acknowledging a necessary victory. Securing the faith's cooperation was a crucial step in stabilizing her reign. She exhaled, feeling a twinge of relief. They turned then to ascend the steps and entered the sept. The interior soared with arches and rainbow light streaming through stained glass. Lyanna could almost feel the hush of centuries pressing down. She walked down the aisle, passing rows of polished pews. The high septon led her to the altar, flanked by tall candles. She saw shadows of the Seven carved into the walls. The father, the mother, the warrior, the maiden, the smith, the crone, the stranger. She sensed the flutter of her own heartbeat, reminiscent of the first time she'd stood in the Godswood at Winterfell, under the watchful face of the weirwood. The high septon turned to her, lifting a small container of holy oils. "Shall we proceed?" She hesitated, glancing at Ned. He nodded, giving her a calm, reassuring look. Robert stood off to the side, arms folded, but he didn't object. Barristan observed silently, white cloak pooling around his boots. Outside, the city awaited. Lyanna bowed her head. "Yes," she said, voice subdued. "Let us begin." In a soft chant, the high septon called upon the Seven to bless her rule. He anointed her brow with oil, then touched it to her lips, her heart, invoking the virtues of the faith. Lyanna felt the oil's coolness, smelled the faint perfume of incense. She closed her eyes, willing herself to carry the realm's burdens with dignity. The Mad King was gone, but ghosts would linger. If the gods were good, they would grant her the strength to guide Westeros toward peace. When the ceremony ended, she stood with that symbolic blessing shining on her skin in the colored light of the sept windows. The high septon turned to Ned, who stepped forward bearing a circlet of black iron inlaid with silver direwolf heads, a newly forged crown to reflect House Stark's ascension. He passed it to the high septon, who held it aloft for the people to see. "In the sight of gods and men," the high septon proclaimed, voice echoing in the massive space, "I crown Lyanna of House Stark, the first of her name, Queen of the Andals, and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lady of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm." The circlet settled on Lyanna's head, its weight a tangible reminder of all she had done, and all she must do. A rumble of reaction came from those gathered. Some applause, some gasps, murmured prayers. She lifted her gaze, scanning the hall. Robert's face was set in an unreadable mask, but he raised a hand in salute. Ned bowed deeply, tears glinting in his eyes. Barristan inclined his head, and in that moment, she felt a flicker of acceptance in his regard. She turned to face the open doors of the sept. Through them, the crowds on the steps and in the streets caught a glimpse of the new Wolf Queen crowned beneath the soaring domes. A hush, then a swelling roar of voices. She knew not if they cheered from devotion or curiosity or fear. She only knew that in that instant, she stood as queen, truly and officially, for all to witness. She inhaled, pressing her trembling hands together. She had seized power through bloodshed and desperation. Now, she had to prove she was worthy of it. The realm would judge her with each passing day. The rest of her life might be a struggle to maintain the fragile peace she had begun. But in that moment, crowned and anointed, she allowed herself one breath of hope. Perhaps, if fortune and will remained with her, she could guide Westeros away from the darkness Eris had left. She stepped forward, the crown steady on her brow. The crowd outside parted, revealing a city battered but alive, waiting for her command. She felt the warmth of Ned's presence at her back, the smoldering sorrow in Robert's stance to one side, the measured calm of Sir Barristan's watchful eyes, and the cunning gaze of Tywin from the shadows. All of the pieces were in motion, and she stood at the heart of it, the Wolf Queen in the south. She would rule, as justly and boldly as a Stark could, until her last breath, or until the realm swallowed her. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. She descended the steps into the sunlight. The city roiled with uncertain cheers, and the hush of possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a raven cried. Winter would always come. But perhaps, for a time, hope might blossom under a queen born of northern winds, and driven by a fierce desire to protect the innocent. She lifted her hand in greeting, letting the southern sun spark off the iron circlet. The crowd responded with applause that rippled through the streets, a wave of sound. In that resonance, she caught the faintest promise of a future unchained from the tyrants of old. A chance for the realm to heal. With steady steps, she made her way down to the waiting masses, the new queen of Westeros, determined to guide them into a brighter dawn.